Welcome back, everyone, to the Spa Sisters podcast with Julie Wren and myself, Carly Chamberlain. We love doing this podcast because it's about reaching out to therapists, engaging with them, inspiring them, sharing stories about other people's lives, their journeys in the beauty and spa world. And today we continue that conversation with our wonderful guest who it's amazing that we've even managed to get her on this podcast, because I have never known someone who works so hard and so fast in my life. So Helen Cain, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's a real pleasure to have you. And we are going to get a little insight into Helen's journey so far, which is very exciting. And I suppose the first question I want to ask you, Helen, is how I know you is very sort of spiritual and centered person who knows herself. And I think that doesn't just happen, that takes time. So my first question is, we know a little bit about your background, working in cabin crew, and now being a global director of spa operations. How did that happen?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me today. Even though I'm 100 miles an hour, I love doing something like this. So thank you. I don't think my journey is probably typical as a therapist. So it's probably good to outline kind of how I got here. I started as a beauty therapist, having done a private beauty course in Southampton, where I live. And I worked in a Clarence Gold salon for nearly 4 years. I loved it. I learned a lot. I was booked 3 months in advance, but I then knew that it was time that I needed to literally spread my wings. And so I applied for the role of, at the time, they had in-flight beauty therapists at Virgin Atlantic. And I applied thinking, there is no way in this world I'm going to get that job. Because when I was at the interview, everybody had stood up and said, I've worked on cruise ships, I've worked for VIPs in London, I'm in the Harrods Beauty Hall. And when I stood up and said I work in a Clarence salon in Southampton, I really felt that they were basically going to tell me to sit down. But anyway, I got through to the second stage, and I was one of the first in-flight beauty therapists at Virgin Atlantic. And that was a long time ago. I won't divulge my age, but that was a long time ago. And at the time, it was long trips, so like 7 nights in Cape Town, 2 nights in New York, and I absolutely lived the dream. I flew full time for about, I'd say, up for 4 years. Then I started to move up the ranks because as the role progressed and more therapists came on board, there was opportunity. And so I became an assessment therapist, which meant that I looked after therapists that had just joined to show them the ropes, because being a therapist on board an aircraft is a very different role to being a therapist in a treatment room. And then I progressed to trainer. And in the training role, I absolutely adored the training role. And I would teach the 23 plus therapists that we'd have in groups come through, because we were growing so rapidly, in how to do the treatments on board and basically kind of induct them into the life of Virgin. And then I became a beauty performance manager, the first role of its kind. I'm very good at startup roles, as you'll find as we work through my career history. But I was the first beauty performance manager in charge of the 19 in-flight assessment therapists. And I was at Virgin Atlantic in that for 14 years.
Wow.
And then after 14 years, the decision was made to remove the service from on board. And at the time, there were nearly 400 therapists that had and I was number 15 to be taken on. So that shows you the growth, how quickly it progressed. It was devastating for anyone that watches this, and I know there are some ex-therapists in the industry that are now spa directors that will probably watch this. It's still one of those days that I remember well, that we were all in a room, nearly 400 of us, and they told us that they were revising the service. So we were all offered to go back as cabin crew, but at the time I'd had my daughter and she was 18 months old, and I didn't want to go back full-time flying. And so I believe opportunities put themselves in front of you. I've believed that my entire life. And literally a door opened to Virgin Limited Edition. And Virgin Limited Edition is a kind of part of Virgin, but a different company. And it's Richard's homes really around the world. Necker Island's the most pivotal, the one that everyone talks about. And they'd had a connection with the in-flight beauty therapists at Virgin, because they would send them there and do like 3-month kind of sabbaticals really to the properties. But with the therapist going, there was no therapist coming to support the properties. And so they needed a spa director to basically, again, a startup role. So something that had never been done before. But they needed somebody to create a role and to support the properties, of which there were 4 at the time. I threw my hat into the ring, as did half of the in-flight beauty therapists or assessment therapists. I had an 18-month-old daughter. I had no reality of how that would work, obviously traveling around the world. But again, I think you've got to grab everything with both hands, and if an opportunity arises, you make it work. And so I did, and I got the role.
Oh, wow.
When the managing director called me, I think I had Georgia in the background, like I say, she was a baby, and he asked me a couple of questions, which I thought was really quite random. And then my new boss then called me afterwards and started talking as if I'd got the job. And I said, "Oh, have I actually got the job?" And she said, "Did he not tell you when he called you that you've got the job?" No. So yeah, I started a role then, which probably is, I'd say still, they've never replaced me. So I think it was a very, very different role. I traveled a lot worldwide to the 4 properties that were there to start with. So that included Morocco, Switzerland, South Africa, and the British Virgin Isles. And then I opened 2 properties with them through my 10 years that I was with them, which was Mont Rochelle in Cape Town and Mahali, Missouri in Kenya. Amazing. So I would go away for about a week. And the rest of the time, my kind of objective, or my objectives for the role were to create businesses for the spas rather than just an add-on within the property. And I think I learned a lot. I had great managers. I still, if she was watching this, I'd shout out to her, but it's not her area. But I think that, you learn a lot from the people that manage you. Sometimes not always good, but I've had some good managers in my time. And she definitely was one that taught me a lot. And then I switched to operations, and I was under the operations director when she retired. And I think that took it to another level for me, because I became very numbers driven, and that's not normal in the spa industry. So again, I say the operations director taught me a lot too, to position me from fluffy spa to number driven objectives. So yeah.
Oh, Helen, I could listen to you all day. Honestly, I love these stories, and you bring them to life, which is just amazing. And it feels like you've always been a very intuitive, open-minded person. So at what point did you have a moment in your life where you kind of felt like you had a connection to the spirit world? Or, because I know that this story goes on, and and I want you to share that with us. But did you kind of know that you were spiritual this whole time, or was this something that evolved? And you went on, I think, to be more in a corporate environment, which I'll let you talk about. But how do you juggle those very opposing things, corporate numbers driven person versus spiritual, calling?
Okay, so I mean, it's quite a story, so I'll try and keep it succinct. So I think I'd always known that I had something. I call it intuition, maybe to start with. I would walk into a room, I would feel the energy of people, I would read the room quite effectively. And in training at Virgin Atlantic, everyone always wanted to know their colours, their auras. And so that was part of, literally, like, part of my lesson every day. They were like, "What colour am I today, Helen?"
You could see colours, but you didn't
Not
know what
yeah.
colour.
I mean, not necessarily see them. I think sometimes you know the colour. Like, I don't see rings of colour around people. I look at someone and I know what colour they are. It's very weird. And where did that start? I lost my mum when I was quite young, well, early 20s. And 6 months after she died, I went to have a treatment at a spa, and I had reflexology. And halfway through the reflexology treatment, the therapist suddenly looked at me and said, "You've just lost somebody really close to you quite recently." And I burst into hysterical tears, couldn't stop sobbing. And she said, "Listen, I want you to know that she's there on the other side, and she's opened a door, and you have such a gift, but you just don't want to walk through the door." And then I guess it became like a bit of an unlocking. I'd meet mediums. Within 5 minutes of being in my presence, they'd tell me that when was I going to see or know that I could see things. But I think the medium side of my, call it intuition or spirituality, I've closed the door on that, because I probably am fearful about, obviously, not wanting to see my mum, having dealt with that. I think it's only at the grand old age that I am now that I'm comfortable enough with that side of it, and realize that actually you can actually control what you see. It's not flooding through you unless you want it to be.
Mm.
But it kind of evolved, because obviously from the point of the color reading in the training to being on board night flights and palm reading. Don't ask me how I can palm read, and apparently quite effectively. And I've never obviously researched how to palm read, so that's just strange. But I guess I've kept the two very separate from kind of work and well, not at Virgin, because Virgin is allows you to be yourself and allows you to be to embrace every area. But as I went into the corporate side of work, that did become more difficult. And I think so. I actually started working for a hotel group that had 10 hotels, and I ended up being the group spa director for them. I think at that point in my life, which was before pre-COVID, leading up to COVID, I think it's very difficult to manage a corporate environment with spirituality. And I think that even in the 2 years that have passed, it's become a lot more open. Now that I've got to this role, I'm seeing that they're more open to it. But at the time that I was there, I probably had to hide quite a lot of that, because I worked in a very male environment. I sat on an exec meeting and being the only woman. So if I'd have started reading the colours of the men in the room, I think they probably would have marched me out. So I guess I was just very careful about it then. But I guess that's probably part of my bigger mission now, having been in that environment.
It's really interesting you say that, because you're quite empowering, and that sort of thing about being in a room full of men, actually the influence you had was probably quite powerful.
Yeah, I think I was probably quite calming. People that know me quite well will probably know that I don't show stress very easily. That's not to say that it's not there, but I'm very good at hiding it, just simply because the roles I've done.
Yeah,
Startup is never easy. It's not for everyone. Having nothing to refer to when you start a role, and the third role I did at the group of hotels at Harbour, that was a role that never existed again. Blank laptop, mobile phone, do what you need to do. And that is stressful, but I think I thrive in a stressful environment. Maybe it's linked to my spirituality and how I ground myself.
so bringing it back to spirituality within the spa space, we know now that spirituality is almost trendy. We want people to be more open-minded and kind of have treatment experiences that access a very holistic side of people and but there's still some resistance in our industry. Julie, do you want to kind of expand on this?
Yes, I would love to. I mean, we talk about soulpreneurs. Why can't we do business with a heart? So, if we take that concept, what do you feel are the biggest obstacles, perhaps today, that maybe spas or hospitality teams facing when they want to do that more soulpreneuring, if you like, if I can use that word, to show that more holistic side, that more caring, because we are in a touch therapy business. So it would only be natural that would want to come through. So how do we actually combine that in a way that is not seen as what some people say is woo-woo, that we
I still sometimes refer to it as woo woo,
yeah.
Julie. So it's hilarious that you say that because that's what I talk about. I think going back to when I was at the Harbour Group and being surrounded by men and I guess being a very corporate part, I think it was probably my mission, having been through that, to try and embrace it for therapists.
Mhm.
I think that the biggest issue, being a spa director background, is that therapists are burnt out.